Hello, welcome back to the Global Renaissance. Our sponsor this week is Satan. Seems strange to say that, but if you don't think he's hot yet, boy, you're missing out. You're not reading it right. Okay, so here we go. I'm sorry I'm posting this several hours later than I had wanted to. The day just got away from me, and so I apologize for that. But welcome back. I'm excited to talk about Milton's Paradise Lost. Let me tell you about what I expect we will do today. First, we're going to start with a brief, somewhat creative exercise that I hope will help you think a bit about what will become your final project. I'm going to follow up on the beautiful Moodle responses that you provided over the past couple of days for books 1 and 4. And then I'm going to provide you with a brief way of looking at books 9 and 12. For your homework, you're reading all of book 9 and just a couple of hundred lines from book 12, the very, very final lines of the epic. I am all too aware that by asking you to read these excerpts, you are getting just a tiny little Whitman sampler of the pure genius that is John Milton. And it's unfortunate, but I feel like a little is still better than none. I love him. The first time I engaged with his work, I was at Oxford University. I was in a study abroad program there, and I didn't like it at all. I thought it was a total yawn. I didn't get what the point was. I read it a second time in graduate school, more in depth, more rigorously, and I liked it. I thought, oh, this is a really powerful engagement with a particular historical and cultural moment. And then the third time I read it was when I taught it in 2010 in my survey of English poetry. And the third time I read it was the charm because I could barely keep it together. I had such an emotional experience reading it. I hope you could at least rationally recognize some of what makes this such a compelling epic. But we'll get there. First, let's look at today's writing prompt, okay? Oh, that's what I'm doing today. I forgot I had that slide there. Surprise, surprise. Scola basta brain. Head like a colander. Okay, so a reminder of why we are doing these exercises each week. You know your final project is a creative one in which you are documenting your experience of the COVID-19 pandemic in some way, any way you like. Where did I get the idea for this? In part, I'm not the only professor who's interested in this. There was an article in the University of Virginia newspaper called Write It Down. Historians suggest keeping a record of life during the pandemic. And this was a really nice article. You can Google it, look it up yourself. But this is a professor from the Department of History at the University of Virginia urging students and others to keep personal records of these tumultuous times. So I got the idea from him. I got the idea from Samuel Pepys. And of course, as you know, Meg Miner, the Illinois Wesleyan archivist, has recommended that we all try this. And so I'm kind of excited about it. This week, I want to focus on a literary technique that you will use twice in 6 minutes. It's a very fancy word for a very simple thing that poets do all the time, and that is anaphora. So here's Joe Brainerd. This is a wonderful poet from the mid to late 20th century. He was an openly gay poet. He wrote a whole book of poems that begin with the phrase, I remember. It is one of my favorite books of poetry. It's funny, it's sad, it's poignant, it's acerbic. I love everything about this book. He not only manages to capture what it was like to grow up in gay in mid-century America, but he captures just a lot of other political and social issues in that milieu as well. So let me see, did I skip how's my slides doing? Oh, yeah, here we go. So, let me just give you a few examples of some of his lines from the book I Remember, published by Joe Brainerd in 1975. I remember the kick I used to get going through my parents' drawers looking for rubbers. Peacock. That was the brand name of the condoms that his parents were using. I think that's so funny. I remember when polio was the worst thing in the world. I remember pink dress shirts and bolo ties. I remember when a kid told me that those sour clover-like leaves we used to eat with little yellow flowers tasted so sour because dogs peed on them. I remember that didn't stop me from eating them. I remember when, in high school, I used to stuff a sock in my underwear. I remember that for my 5th birthday, all I wanted was an off-one-shoulder black satin evening gown. I got it, and I wore it to my birthday party. So great. It's just, they may not make a whole lot of sense individually, and then you put them all together and you start to get a memoir-like recollection of his youth that's very compelling. So what is anaphora? Very simple. It's the repetition of the same word or group of words at the beginnings of successive clauses or sentences, right? Milton does this constantly. He's using it everywhere, and lots of poets do. It's a very powerful, incantatory rhetorical mode of expression that each time you're using it, you're repeating it with a difference. So here's just one example of many from Paradise Lost. Is this the region, this the soil, the clime? Said then the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light. Oh, God, he's so good. He's talking about hell, right? He's in the fiery lake, this pit. There's no escape. He's chosen his destiny. But each time you read the word this, you wonder what will follow after it. So it's repetition, variation. Is this the region? This the soil? This the clime? This the seat? This mournful gloom? So that you start with something geographical and then finally end up on something psychological. Yeah? This darkness and light, this mournful gloom. Oh my God, it's so sad. Beautiful. So now you know this term, anaphora. If you repeat a word or phrase at the end of a sentence or at the end of a poetic line or clause, it's epiphora on the outside, right? But anaphora is at the front of the line. So I'd like you to try this. I would like you for 3 minutes to get out your notebook. Where's my notebook? Oh! And also, why is my phone beeping? Sorry. Let me get my notebook. You get yours too. Dun, 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 dun. I've got my trusty notebook. Thank you, excuse me. Ready to go. For 3 minutes, I want you to write down 5 lines that begin with the phrase, I remember. You can write whatever you like as long as it's unique to your experience. As you saw with Joe Brainerd, only he could have written those lines. You know what I'm saying? So I'd like you to try the same thing. Attend to your senses of smell, of taste, of texture, of sound, of sight, and see where that leads you. I'm going to set my timer for 3 minutes. Let us begin. Go. Oh, well, that went by quickly. Whew. Okay, so that was five lines that begin with the phrase "I remember." I want you to take another 3 minutes. That was a retrospective exercise. This is a prospective exercise. This is one in which you think about what you want for the future. I borrowed this exercise from, I don't know, some homeschooling website I found where they were talking about making a wish jar with your kid so that your kid doesn't get so anxious and they can think about a future when COVID-19 isn't like keeping us in the house all day. So the website suggested have your kid make a wish jar, and every time they want to do something they can't do, you tell them to write it down and put it in the jar. I thought that was a pretty good idea. Not just for children, but for adults. What if we were to make a list of our wishes for what we will do when this time is done? So, I would love you for another 3 minutes to write 5 lines that begin with the phrase I wish. And I'm going to set the timer and you will start writing. All right. Wow. That went by quickly as well. I'll tell you, I've been writing for decades now, And every time I give myself a short timed writing exercise, I feel like I instantly want to write more. Isn't that remarkable? The power of constraints in writing. Very nice. All right, thank you for engaging with that. You'll send a photo to me of the results. You'll send that via email sometime between now and Saturday would be ideal. Maybe Sunday if you have to wait till then, that's fine. That way I know that you watched this video. Thank you. That's your participation for the day. So there we go. Moving on. So let's go to John Milton. Let's talk about your work from last week, which I loved. These were some of your best Moodle responses of the semester. I was so proud as I read them. I had no sense. I gave you so little setup, for reading John Milton, and I had no real sense of whether you would be able to access his big, grand rhetorical style, his highly elusive style, the ways in which he's constantly pointing to other religious texts, mythological texts, historical phenomena, the scientific revolution. I mean, he's just like John Donne. He's this giant tsunami that's constantly pulling in everything from his intellectual space. I had no idea how you would engage with it. It turns out you did a beautiful job, especially considering how little context you had, but also the fact that you're skipping around. It's wonderful. You did a great job. I also loved your videos of you all reading your lines from Paradise Lost. It was no surprise to me that many of you chose Satan's lines about the mind being its own place, from book 1. Where was that? Let's see, book 1. Yeah, it's such a great quote, isn't it? Around line in the 290s, I believe, right? Many of you chose these are some of the most famous lines in Paradise Lost, and of course you were drawn to them just as centuries of readers have been. What does he say? This is when he's... Yeah, here we go. Then this was part of that anaphora I was describing earlier. Is this the region, this the soil, the clime, said the then lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he who now is sovereign can dispose and bid what shall be right. And by the way, dispose in that passage means he can author, he can control, he can supervise. And bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equalled, force hath made supreme above his equals. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors, hail, infernal world, and thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still the same, and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater? Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Those lines, man, I mean, the whole epic is great, but what a magnificent passage, Those lines have meant a great deal to me over the years when I have found myself in a place where I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was making the right choice. And then I realized I had made a terrible mistake, and I found myself in an irreversible situation. I've thought of those lines many times in my life, ever since I read them for the first time. And it's clear that those lines now mean something different too. We're now in a place most of us don't want to be. Most of us want freedom, but we are constrained, physically constrained right now. And so to read those lines becomes especially poignant because it helps me think about, well, how could I How could I rearrange my own brain? How is my mind its own place? How could I think about the restraints on my physical self, but be free in my mind? It's very interesting. So I loved your videos. The reason I asked you to do that activity was, of course, I wish we had done the Milton readathon. I believe very strongly that poetry should always be read aloud, especially someone like John Milton. This is such a incredibly dramatic poem. And I loved how each of you, in your own way, made the lines feel easy to read. You really seemed to get a sense of his flow. So thank you for doing that. We talked a lot, so let's take a step back and see what's happening with Satan, Adam, and Eve in books 1 and 4. We talked a lot at the beginning of the semester about the Renaissance desire for a green space, for a new Eden. You might like the first text that comes to mind for me is Walter Raleigh's travel from his narrative of Guyana, and how he talks about that as a green space that is just dripping with gold and waiting to be exploited, right? Well, part of that desire that Renaissance subjects had for a green Edenic space comes from a foundational problem, right? In a Judeo-Christian context, we as humans are already fallen. We are always in a state of fallenness. What do I mean by that? Because of Adam and Eve, again, in a Judeo-Christian context, we are born into sin. We are prisoners of our bodies, and while we hope for the grace of God, we cannot know for sure if He is with us. We can speak to Him through prayer, but He doesn't speak back unless we are prophets, which most of us are not. We search for signs of His existence in the world, and sometimes our faith is shattered by suffering, by isolation, by catastrophe, by fear. And yet God insists in every sacred text that we believe in Him, that we have faith in Him, that we submit to His awesome power. And that word submission is very, very important in Paradise Lost. I don't think anything I'm saying here is terribly controversial. Please remember what I've said before. I'm not necessarily espousing this worldview. I'm just describing what I think is a fairly common Judeo-Christian framework. So this fallenness, this sense that we are in a constant state of sin and failure and a fall from Eden and from paradise, is the price that we pay for free will. Right? So God gave us free will. And so, but then that means that there's a complex kind of algorithm in Christianity. Adam and Eve they were given everything. They were given paradise. They were given leisure time. They could have hung out there as long as they wanted to. They had a companionate marriage that was they seemed to love each other in the same way. They were both equally beautiful. And then they ruined it. It was the one thing that God told them not to do, was to eat the forbidden fruit. He told them to obey. They didn't obey. God exiled them from paradise so that they would live as we do now, with the pangs of childbirth, the difficulties of work and disappointment and quarreling and shame and mortality, all of the various kinds of sins and vices that we all struggle with. But God says, it's okay. I won't talk to you anymore, and you won't feel how close I am to you because you will no longer be in paradise. But I will look out for you, Adam and Eve, and your descendants as a chosen people, and at least you will have free will. And here's the bonus, I, God, will have my son die for your sins. So even if humans have to live in a constant state of misery, disappointment, loneliness, despair, frustration, if they choose to believe in Christ, they are then able to feel reassured that Jesus will save them from their sins. They will be able to meet up with God in the afterlife and so on. Now, all of this is very interesting to Milton because his sense is like ours, that Satan is pure evil, right? But if Satan is pure evil, wouldn't he be easy to avoid? Wouldn't there be a lot of flashing lights and road barriers saying, stay away from this guy? Well, okay, let's think about that for a minute. Paradise Lost, in many ways, is an investigation into the nature of evil. And what does Milton find when he investigates that evil? He finds that evil doesn't advertise on a billboard. Evil originates in a figure like Satan, who is capable of changing shape, who is strong, he's beautiful. They haven't made the movie version of Paradise Lost yet, but when they do, they'll have to have someone like Chris Helmsworth or Jason Momoa or somebody like that play him. Someone stunningly charismatic, handsome, ripped. He's muscular, he's strong, he's beautiful. In fact, multiple times we are told that he is radiant. And in fact, his name Lucifer, Lucy, that means light. Lucifer means light. He was God's favorite angel when he was up in heaven. And when Satan wanted to become equal with God, that was the only time there was a problem. Up until that moment, he was closest to God. And God said, no, you cannot be equal to me. The only person who will get that close to me is my son, Jesus. My son is the one who will be closest to me, and you must always be lesser than and obey me. So that's where the problem started with Satan. And Satan was having none of that. That was the origin of the civil war in heaven, angel against angel, and Satan and his rebel angels lost that battle. And that's Satan's tragedy. I'm going to go back to that wonderful engraving by Gustave Doré. Where is that? I just love looking at him. Yeah, Gustave Doré, he created these beautiful engravings to accompany the text of Paradise Lost in the 1860s, I believe, 1866. And this one is just stunning. I mean, look at Satan. So this is him. He's cast down. And how interesting that he's wearing an ancient Roman warrior's garb, right? And that's a beautiful way to harken back to the notion of Paradise Lost as a Virgilian kind of epic, right? He's got these beautiful, powerful bat-like wings. He's got his hand on his head in this, posture of anguish and despair as he looks up and thinks about all that he's lost in heaven. Oh, Satan. But Satan refused to submit to a monarch like God who acts like an absolutist, right? He would not submit to God in a blind way. Now that's very appealing to us as Americans, right? Milton, in many ways, is our great-granddaddy. Keep in mind, he believed in science. He thought science was real. He met Galileo. He was fascinated by the cosmos and an understanding of the planetary movement of the planetary spheres. He believed that people who are unhappily married should divorce one another, which was not a popular sentiment at the time. Milton believed in a free press that should be capable of critiquing its government. He was a staunch anti-royalist who believed in elected representatives of the people. We are his descendants, right? We are Americans. What Milton was working with theoretically and historically and politically, these were the seeds that grew into the thoughts of Hobbes and Locke and all of these great philosophers that informed Thomas Jefferson and all the founding fathers to think about our rights and our liberties. We as Americans are very interested in stories of revolution, of rebellion against a despot, right? And so for us to read about Satan, we're very drawn to him in that way. And so as a result, Milton is creating a Satan that is very human and very seductive, frankly. So he's a figure who gives us coping mechanisms. Oh, actually, if I could, I'm going to go to Moodle now. This is going to take me a moment to find some of the responses that I want to, but I want to respond and engage more with your Moodle responses, which I enjoyed so much this week. I really did. So Nathan, to go to some of the points I'm talking about, Nathan, you had a nice response. You're right. It's interesting to see Satan conflicted, as I feel that a lot of people tend to just know him as being purely evil and just that. In the beginning of book 4, he reflects on what he was, what is, and what must be. This and the following reflection and even consideration of asking for forgiveness before ultimately deciding to continue being evil was surprising to read. Yes, I agree. Like you said in your online lecture, Milton's views on Satan seem to be rather unique, and his depiction of Satan in Paradise Lost reflects this. In the introduction we read, there was a reference to a quote from Satan in chapter 5. Who can in reason then or right assume monarchy over such as live by right his equals, if in power and splendor less in freedom equal? The reading of this being a criticism of monarchy and a call for equality would surely have resonated with many people, but there is also the fact that it is Satan who is saying this. I personally felt my idea of who Satan is was challenged by this reading. As a society, we tend to depict his relationship with God as being black and white. However, knowing how he falls from heaven and his internal struggles, there's surely a lot more going on with his motivations and character. That's very well put, Nathan. And I would just add to that understanding the complexities of Satan and his relationship with God then make the seduction of Eve easier to understand. And in Eve's seduction, we are then able to understand how evil is seductive, even in contemporary context, right? So Satan is a figure who gives us coping mechanisms in difficult times. He's in despair, he's trapped, he's in psychic turmoil, and I am guessing that's why so many of you recited those famous lines from book 1, as I said, and we already talked about this. Bear with me. I'm getting there. Yeah, we already read these lines about how the mind is its own place and how it's capable of making a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven, and at least in hell we can be free, right? But this is something that really interested me. He can't stick to that rationalization. So this is for us as readers, this is one of the first sort of insights that we get into the turmoil in Satan's psyche. But Paige Dickinson, you picked up on the despair that Satan feels in book 4. And I really liked this quite a bit. This was book 4, line 73. Again, I'm going to jump around a little here. I hope you'll bear with me. This is book 4, around line 73. Yeah. So, Paige, you tapped into this. This was a passage. If you'll bear with me. I always got to find my place with all my notes and whatnot, you know. At the beginning of book 4, Satan is so dejected. He's really fallen into a state of doubt when he goes to the Garden of Eden and when he sees how magnificent everything is. He comes down to earth wherever he goes. Oh, this is important. Around line 18, he says, horror and doubt distract his troubled thoughts, and from the bottom stir the hell within him. For within him hell he brings, and round about him, nor from hell one step no more than from himself can fly by change of place. Now conscience wakes despair that slumbered, wakes the bitter memory of what he was, what is, and what must be worse. Of worse deeds, worse sufferings must ensue. I love in that moment that he has the pangs of conscience, this notion that this figure of evil would have a moral compass and realizes, at least briefly at times, that he has glimmers of what he's done that's wrong. And that's important because in book 4, he realizes Me miserable. Let's look at these lines. Me miserable. Which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair. Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. And in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me, opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. So this is amazing, this description of despair, however, deep he thinks he's gone, there's an even deeper level of despair that he's feeling there. Oh, then at last relent. Is there no place left for repentance, none for pardon left? And he's realizing, he has a moment here where he's saying, the only way that I could really repent is if I submitted to God, right? None left but by submission. And that word disdain forbids me, and my dread of shame among the spirits beneath, whom I seduced with other promises and other vaunts then to submit, boasting I could subdue the omnipotent. So I can't submit to God for two reasons. First of all, I disdain him. I loathe him, first of all. And second of all, I can't go back to those guys that I brought down to hell with me, my fellow rebel angels. I can't lose face by telling them I was wrong. What will they have to believe in if they don't have me to believe in? Very, very interesting meandering that he's going through there. But what I love about this passage in book 4 is that it's the opposite, basically, of what he says in book 1. At book 1, he's like, the mind is its own place. I can make in my mind whatever I want to be. Here he's saying, wherever I go, I am hell. I take hell with me. And I think it might have been Alicia. You wrote this in your post. I was very moved by it. And I think it's absolutely right on. Alicia. This was really nice. Perhaps my favorite line of book 4 was, which way I fly is hell, myself am hell. This is a very powerful line. I think anyone who's been depressed can connect with this phrase. Depression is an illness that follows you. There's no escaping it. Even if for a brief moment it has been suppressed, it will still loom over you. Satan's feelings and actions are more drastic than ours, but he represents the negative emotions we all feel, which is comforting. Therefore, Satan becomes a character that the reader can understand and connect with. Oh, so good. So true. I absolutely agree with that. Very, very insightful response. Thank you, Alicia. Surely each of us has felt both ways in life. At times, we might justify our situation and try to rationalize it so that we don't go insane. At other times, we realize that we can't adapt to a new situation and we feel despair as a result. In the end, Satan defies subjection because he is not less than God. He just can't believe that. He feels he is equal to God. He feels that he is a genius. He feels that he's extraordinary and charismatic and strong and a real leader. And yet the question nags at him, couldn't he have just submitted to God and enjoyed all that heaven had to offer? The bigger question, but, and this is nice, Adam had a nice response that I want to spend a moment on here. Just want to give attention to these because really you must be noticing as you read these responses how philosophical and ethical Paradise Lost is as well. Adam, I liked your response very much, but what I liked in particular is when you say, you had read the introduction, which I appreciate, and you're very interested in how the authors of the introduction present Satan as a kind of epic hero. But he's not a genuine hero. Satan's greatest flaw is his hypocrisy. That's interesting. His embrace in hell of that same unjustified hierarchical rule, which he rightly rejected in heaven. When Beelzebub, Satan's nearest mate, addresses him in the fiery abyss as prince and chief of the many-throned powers, Satan doesn't reject the stately titles, but rather accepts his dictatorial position as the sole unchallenged ruler of pandemonium. Very interesting. Worse still, perhaps, perhaps, is the fact that the fallen angel knows his reign is erroneous and inexcusable, which we were just talking about. Later, when approaching Eden, Satan laments the suffering he has wrought on those demonic legions which followed him in their failed revolution. With diadem and scepter high advanced, the lower still I fall, only supreme in misery. Such joy ambition finds. If Satan were in fact a heroic figure, he would have instantly and instinctually rejected the same baseless power with which God reigns, embracing Beelzebub and the rest of his revolutionary comrades as legitimate equals. If he had done that, this book would have been so revolutionary that Milton himself probably would have started a revolution that would have resulted in anarchy, right? So what you're posing as a possibility is, or at least you seem to be posing the question, what are the alternatives to monarchy in Milton's moment? And how is it that Satan actually falls short of being a true revolutionary? That's a magnificent question. Very, very interesting. I have so many notes here. We're not going to have time to go through all of this stuff. Oh my God, I'm already so far behind. God help me. Well, so I think in reading Adam's response, what that helped me think about is that Satan, as grand as he is, as valorous and heroic as he is, as sympathetic as we are to him, he can't quite escape the paradigms that imprison him. All of this despair becomes even more horrible when Satan sees paradise, Adam and Eve, right? This is where his real despair takes hold. Milton basically provides a description of paradise that is so vivid it feels like you're looking at a 4K television. Like it's like hyper real. It's so beautiful. It's so colorful. It's astonishing, right? So around in book 4, around lines 205 through 287. Really, really beautiful. I'll read just a few lines of this because the description is great, but what's even greater is imagining Satan looking at this and just salivating, just being in disbelief that God could create such a place, such an amazing, amazing world. And we don't live in paradise. We live in the fallen world. But amazingly, nature's bounty reminds us it's at least an inkling of that beauty that Adam and Eve found in paradise. So this is around line 205 in book 4. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. Beneath him, so him is Satan, beneath him with new wonder now he views, to all delight of human sense exposed in narrow room, nature's whole wealth. Yea, more, a heaven on earth, for blissful paradise of God the garden was, by him in the east of Eden planted. Eden stretched her line from Oran eastward to the royal towers of great Seleucia, built by Grecian kings, or where the sons of Eden long before dwelt in Telassar. In this pleasant soil his far more pleasant garden God ordained. And by the way, the reason I assigned Paradise Lost was partly because it's awesome, but partly all the mapping that Milton does, right? He's always trying to describe the geography of paradise and the realms of heaven and hell. And that geography is really fascinating and related to our global Renaissance theme. Out of the fertile ground he caused to grow all trees of noblest kind for sight, smell, taste, and all amid them stood the tree of life, high, eminent, blooming ambrosial fruit of vegetable gold. And next to life, our death, the tree of knowledge, grew fast by, knowledge of good, bought dear by knowing ill. Southward through Eden went a river large, nor changed his course, but through the shaggy hill passed underneath engulfed, for God had thrown that mountain as his garden mold high raised upon the rapid current, which through veins of porous earth with kindly thirst updrawn, rose a fresh fountain, and with many a rill watered the garden. Thence united fell down the steep glade, and met the nether flood, which from his darksome passage now appears and now divided into four main streams. What'd you say? No. Excuse me. I know. I don't know. I don't know, son. Hi. Okay. Can you just...
I need a Minecraft.
Oh, okay. I can't remember where it is. Can you go play with your Legos?
We're just doing this just in case.
Just in case. All right, I'll be done soon, sir.
I'll eventually find it.
Yeah, I bet you will, too. I bet you will. Thank you, dear. It's so beautiful. I mean, he's describing, I could go on and on. I don't want to drive it. How the water is like sapphire blue. The fruits are gold. Everything is so colorful, so sharp, so beautiful. And he just is really describing how densely populated it is with all of these wonderful fruits. Anything they could possibly want, it's all there for them. There is so, and Milton is going above and beyond to use human words in a fallen world to describe the paradise. It's not possible. He's going overboard to do it, and he can barely contain himself, right? And then how does he describe Adam and Eve? Well, that's where things get interesting too. His powers of description are just so, oh my God, amazing, right? Where shall I begin? Adam and Eve are beautiful. And he says this is around line 299 or 300. We know that Eve is born of Adam's body. So Adam is born first, and several of you commented on this. You noticed that Adam seems to be closer to God. That is true. Not only is Adam closer to God, he's closer to God's angels. So God's angels, Raphael and Gabriel in particular, they spend a lot of time talking to Adam and telling Adam that he is the custodian of the garden. And then they tell Adam to tell Eve. So she comes second, and that's really important. And Gia, you had a really interesting response to what you suspected was some misogyny surrounding the characterization of Eve, that she's a narcissist, that she stares, when she's first created, she stares at herself and her beauty, and she seems to be more in love with herself than with Adam, and that's true. But that's a really interesting moment. You could read that as misogynistic. So that's around book 4. That's around line 450. Let's jump down to that for a minute. So Eve is super hot, and she is talking to Adam, and he is, she's basically saying, that day I oft remember when from sleep I first awaked and found myself reposed under a shade of flowers, much wondering where and what I was, whence thither brought and how. She's remembering the moment she was born, she was created out of Adam's body. Not distant far from thence a murmuring sound of waters issued from a cave and spread into a liquid plain that stood unmoved, pure as the expanse of heaven. So she's created from Adam's body. But the first thing she sees is not Adam. The first thing that she hears and then sees is there's water coming from a cave, and she's curious. She's a very curious person. That's interesting to me. I thither went with unexperienced thought and laid me down on the green bank to look into the clear, smooth lake that to me seemed another sky. Wow, that's beautiful. As I bent down to look, just opposite, a shape within the watery gleam appeared, bending to look on me. I started back. It started back. But pleased, I soon returned. She's realizing this is my reflection. Pleased, it returned as soon with answering looks of sympathy and love. There I had fixed mine eyes till now, and pined with vain desire, had not a voice thus warned me, what there thou seest, fair creature, is thyself. With thee it came and goes, but follow me, and I will bring thee where no shadow stays thy coming, and thy soft embraces, he whose image thou art, him thou shalt enjoy, inseparably thine. To him shalt bear multitudes like thyself, and thence be called mother of human race. What could I do but follow straight, invisibly thus led? Till I espied thee, she's speaking to Adam, till I espied thee, fair indeed, and tall, under a sycamore tree, yet methought less fair, less winning soft, less amiably mild, than that smooth, watery image. Back I turned, thus thou following Christ aloud, return, fair Eve. Whom fliest thou? Whom thou fliest? Of him thou art, his flesh and his bone. To give thee being I lent out of my side to thee, nearest my heart, substantial life. To have thee by my side, henceforth an individual, solace dear. Part of my soul I seek thee, and thee claim my other half. With that thy gentle hand seized mine. I yielded, and from that time see how beauty is excelled by manly grace and wisdom, which alone is truly fair. Ho, 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 ho! Whoa! What just happened there? She fell in love with herself, and all she wanted to do was look at herself. But Adam said, hey now, don't be so interested in just looking at yourself. You were made to be with me. I sacrificed my rib so that you could walk on earth and be the mother of the human race. What are you doing here? Now that's interesting. It seems as if she has to be persuaded that that following Adam is the right thing to do. Keep this in mind when you read Book 9, because when you read Book 9, you're going to notice that this is a problem that God has created. God is talking to Adam all the time. His angels are talking to Adam all the time about the history of creation, about the fall of Satan and the rebel angels, this and that. And meanwhile, Adam is saying to Eve, oh, could you go fix us some appetizers for when Raphael comes by and talks to me? And she's like, yeah, I'll fix you some appetizers. And then when Satan talks to her, he gives her the kind of attention that she's really looking for. And she's so curious. And she keeps being told by Adam, don't be so curious. Follow my authority. Follow God's law. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Just do what I say. And Satan doesn't talk to her like that. He humors her and he acknowledges her curiosity. And he says to her, I was curious too, you know, and I ate of the fruit. And look, I'm talking to you now. I didn't die. Look what you could be too. You could be a real queen of this place. So am I trying to be an apologist for Milton's misogyny? Is it possible to read these passages in a way that suggests that Eve is a narcissist, she's vain, she's superficial? Yeah, you can definitely read her this way. Sorry, I gotta plug in my computer here. But there's another way too, which is, what about her rights? What about her curiosities? What about her moral agency? And how is it that Satan might be attending to her in a way that Adam is not able to? It's very, very interesting. I'm going to stop there. I mean, there's so much more I could say. There's so much more. When you get to Book 9, you're not even going to believe how fantastic it is. Let me see what my notes have me saying here. Oh, there's Narcissus. That's nice. That's a little painting by Caravaggio of Narcissus looking at his own reflection. It's a beautiful moment that Milton is picking up on, which of course comes from Ovid, is very famous in the Renaissance and is depicted here. Here are some questions I'm going to leave you with. Actually, first, let me tell you what transpires between Book 4 and Book 9. This is on that shared Google sheet that I shared with you for our Milton Readathon, so you don't have to worry too much about it. You can always look at that if you want to. Between books 4 and 9, what do you miss? So much. But briefly, the angel Gabriel says that Satan has to leave paradise in 1 hour. So in book 4, Satan is looking at all this beauty. The angel Gabriel sees Satan, and Gabriel's kind of like a bouncer. And he says, get out. Get out of the gate. You weren't invited here. Get out, right? They agree to not fight. Then at the beginning of book 5, Eve has a dream where Satan walks her to the tree of knowledge. She tells oh, excuse me. Oh, thanks. She tells Adam about the dream that she has about Satan, and Adam is deeply troubled. God calls the angel Raphael and tells him to warn Adam about Satan. Raphael has a bit of lunch with Adam and Eve. He alludes to what might be possible if Adam and Eve obey God. In book 6, there's a huge battle that ensues between Satan's forces and God's forces. In book 7, Raphael continues to chat with Adam, tell him about the creation story. In book 8, Raphael continues to chat with Adam and tell him about Adam's own creation, right? In book 9, which I'm asking you to read, Satan returns from his dismissal from paradise. He's angrier than ever. He comes back at night. He takes the shape of a snake or a serpent, as Genesis would have it. Morning comes, and Adam and Eve prepare for their day's work. And Eve says to Adam, instead of us working together in the garden, why don't we divide our labors? We'll be more efficient that way. Listen to Eve, that little capitalist. And Adam is worried about this idea, and Eve is surprised by his distrust. And she's like, geez, come on, don't you trust me? Why don't you trust me? I thought that we had this perfect companionate love affair, right? And she says, how can we be happy if we live in constant fear of this foe that we keep hearing about, Satan? How can we be happy if we live in fear and distrust each other? Interesting. So I'm just going to leave that there. And here are some questions to consider. As you read all of book 9 and the last couple hundred lines of book 12, what do you make of the nature of free will, of knowledge, of Satan's argument as he tempts Eve? It's a very compelling argument, and I would love for you to try to, perhaps in a Moodle response, you could try to summarize it, if you could, and see if you think it's persuasive. Many people have thought so. Another question you might consider, how does the eating of the fruit change the relationship between Adam and Eve? It's very tragic and sad what happens to them, and very believable, very human. Yeah, what happens? What changes between them? And another question you might consider is, what do you think of the ending of book 12? The angel Michael, his final advice, Eve's words to Adam, what they see and feel as they leave paradise for good, for a state of exile and woe. It's very sad, very, very sad. But there's hope there too. And I think the hope is what makes this epic so wonderful. Just great. So here's a question for the article that I'm asking you to read. Very short. This is not a scholarly article, although it is by a scholar. His name is Islam Isa. He's a contemporary scholar. And let me show you his book. Actually, he's got 2 really terrific books that I'll probably allude to next week. This is his single-authored monograph, Milton in the Arab Muslim World. And this was actually one of the big reasons I put Milton on our syllabus, because the scholarship of Islam Isa is very, very compelling to me. This is something I really didn't know anything about. I didn't know how Milton was received in the Arab world, but he has been translated into Arabic. Arabic readers and scholars have loved him for centuries, and in the past 10 years, Milton has become a real flashpoint kind of author for a number of reasons, and we can talk about that next week. He's also one of the editors of this wonderful book called Digital Milton, which is all about Milton in the 21st century and various online digital humanities projects that are really quite compelling, and we can talk about those next week as well. So the question as you read Islam Isa's article is, how does Milton's epic resonate with contemporary readers in the Middle East today? And you might be quite intrigued by the answer to that. So what is your homework? Your homework is you have to read Milton's Paradise Lost, all of book 9, and then book 12. Actually, it's very short, lines 574 through 649. That's on the syllabus, which is on Moodle. Continue reading on the Milton Reading Room website. I hope you're taking advantage of those annotations and footnotes. They're very, very good. I love that resource. Read Islam Isa's very short article from The Guardian. Post your online response by midnight on April 12th. I would love it if you could do it by Saturday. Please try. I know you have so much to do, but the sooner you could do it, the better for me. And if you could send a JPEG of your writing activity via email as soon as possible, I would really appreciate that too. I really feel like I fell short in this video. There's so much I want to say. I am so easily overwhelmed by Milton because he's so magnificent. God, I love him. But I'll stop there. Thank you again for your wonderful Moodle responses. Please engage with him again this week. And that's it. I hope you continue to remain safe and healthy, and you're taking care of your families. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.